All right, good morning, everyone. So thank you for taking time out to come to my session. My name is Brian Long, CWNE 159, and I'd like to take some time this morning to discuss integrating Bluetooth into a medical device. So we're going to take some time this morning to go ahead and go through an overview of Bluetooth. How many of you are familiar with Bluetooth and how it works? How many are familiar with Bluetooth protocols and host controller and all of that fun stuff? A little bit? Okay, great. So hopefully this will be a good introduction to how Bluetooth works and the different architectures and how everything kind of works together. Then what I want to do is I want to demo some of the basic commands that are available to you for working with Bluetooth devices, both at the controller and the host level. And then finally, I want to go through an implementation case review and just talk about one of our experiences in trying to implement this at a facility and how we prepared and what we went through when we were physically on site. Sound good? All right. So first, it all begins with the specification. The Bluetooth specification is defined by the Bluetooth Special Interest Group, or the Bluetooth SIG. That was established in 1998, and currently they have over 27,000 members as part of that group. As you can see, as I highlighted, there is approximately 2,800 pages of glorious Bluetooth information in this specification. So you take this, take a CWAP book and your 802.11 standard, and you got a great party over the weekend, right? So. Bluetooth implementations. I was very fortunate to take a class on Bluetooth last year, and one of the things that was really confusing to me was kind of the different implementations and how different things work. So there's first and foremost, the first Bluetooth that came out is known today as Bluetooth Classic. That's defined in the 2.1 specification as part of in the Bluetooth document, and that is basically geared toward streaming information or requiring a constant connection between the master and the slave devices. So it's really geared toward applications for streaming video, streaming audio, and those types of things. Obviously, the biggest craze out there right now is Bluetooth Low Energy, or Bluetooth Smart, or Bluetooth LE, or BTLE, or BLE. So there's a lot of different acronyms related to Bluetooth Low Energy. The big thing with that is obviously it needed to operate on low power, so you could have things that could basically not require a constant connection, but kind of report the state of what's going on. So you got things like Bluetooth scales, you've got all kinds of different things, the beacons. So you don't have a constant connection, but you do have like a ping or some type of state update related to the information that it's providing. Additionally, we have things like laptops and tablets and those types of things, and they typically are going to support both. They're going to support both classic Bluetooth as well as the Bluetooth Low Energy. So Bluetooth devices themselves operate in what's called a Piconet, or a personal area network, which is designed for short-range communication. When looking at the specification, typically you're seeing that range at being about 10 meters or 30 feet where devices are going to communicate with each other. Devices communicate in what's called a master-slave association. So within an individual Piconet, you can only have one master. And that master is responsible for slaves connecting to it, getting onto the Piconet, and synchronizing the Piconet. And that's really a lot different from what we're used to than with Wi-Fi. Obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about the modulation, but one of the big things is that Bluetooth uses frequency hopping, where timing is critical to how the communications work together. In this master-slave relationship, all the communication between the devices goes through the master. So you could have a laptop, for example, you could have a Bluetooth keyboard and a Bluetooth mouse connected to it. So the keyboard is going to communicate with the laptop, the mouse is going to communicate with the laptop, but the mouse and the keyboard are not going to communicate to each other. Okay, so the slaves aren't going to communicate to each other, only slaves to masters. Okay? All right, so here's something that everyone loves and enjoys. So Bluetooth operates in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. What you see here is Bluetooth Classic. So Bluetooth Classic is also known as BR-EDR, or Basic Rate Enhanced Data Rate. We'll talk more about that in a second. So with Basic Rate Enhanced Data Rate, there are 79 channels across the 2.4 spectrum. They're each 1 megahertz wide. You'll notice here I have some channels that are highlighted in gray. These channels are involved with the discovery process and connection process. So as you see, when a Bluetooth device is actually connecting to another Bluetooth device, it's not frequency hopping across all of the channels. It's actually frequency hopping across a subset of the channels, specifically 32 of them. Okay. When we look to LE channels, again, like I said, it's a little bit different than your BDR channels. So in this case, they're 2 megahertz wide. So you have a total of 40 channels. And the channels I have highlighted in gray are the advertising channels. Again, those are the channels that are used for connections. And you can see that there's an advertising channel in the beginning of the spectrum, the middle of the spectrum, and the end of the spectrum to try to get devices to connect and associate to them. Okay? So a little bit different. So again, BR-EDR, you've got 79 1 megahertz channels, and LE, you've got 42 megahertz channels. Power classes. So again, with the basic rate enhanced data rate Bluetooth, there's 3 different types of power classes. Class 1 is 100 milliwatts, Class 2 is 2.5 milliwatts, and Class 3 is 1 milliwatt. So obviously, this is extremely important in your environment due to the fact that, if you've got headsets that are blasting away at 100 milliwatts and killing the spectrum, look into that. Can you adjust that output power? Does it really have to be Bluetooth? Understand the use case and understand, what is really needed for that device to be transmitting at. And with Bluetooth low energy can operate from down to 1,000th of a milliwatt all the way up to, or I'm sorry, 100th of a milliwatt all the way down to, or all the way up to 10 milliwatts. Okay, so as you can see, the channels and the power are different depending on if you're using classic Bluetooth or if you're using BLE. Modulation. So obviously, for Wi-Fi, we know that in the 2.0 gigahertz spectrum, the modulation is going to either be DSSS or OFDM. In Bluetooth, you can see that it's using different types of modulation, again, depending on its capabilities. So low energy is using GFSK as well as basic rate. And both low energy and basic rate Bluetooth provide 1 meg of throughput based off of this modulation scheme. Enhanced data rate is a little bit different, where you're looking at pi over 4 DPSK and 8 PSK, which give 2 and 3 megabit bandwidth, respectively. So as you can see here, the modulation schemes for Bluetooth devices, as we all know, is different than what it is in Wi-Fi. So what does that mean for Wi-Fi devices? That means that all these Bluetooth devices are going to be, as part of the clear channel assessment, they're going to be classified as the non-Wi-Fi devices, right? Because a Wi-Fi device is not going to be able to decode any of these transmissions. So as a result of that, per the specification, any device that is because it's a non-Wi-Fi device, it needs to be 20 dB above the lowest modulation coding sensitivity, which is neg 82 according to the specification. So that means any Wi-Fi device that hears a Bluetooth device at greater than neg 62, the energy detect will trip, and it's going to go to a medium busy, which will hold off. Okay? So again, if a Wi-Fi device here's a Bluetooth device greater than neg62, that's going to cause a medium busy and have it hold off, which obviously creates contention, creates delays, creates latency, retries, all that fun stuff. Any questions on that? Scott? So in some of the research, so Scott's question was, is there any understanding of which devices out there are in the different power classes of Bluetooth devices? And when I was looking stuff up, basically, the initial implementations were more at the 100 milliwatts because they were, they want them to connect, they want them to work. It seems like more of the devices that are out there now are more operating at the 2.5 milliwatts. The biggest thing, of course, again, is seeing if you can adjust that. Some devices allow you to adjust the output power, some don't. So right now, the majority of the devices, from my understanding anyway, are at the 2.5 milliwatt output. LE devices, I'm not sure. Most of the work that we've done has been with the classic Bluetooth because we need a constant connection. Okay. Okay, the core system architecture of Bluetooth, it's pretty straightforward, and the hardest thing for me to figure out was the terminology and how they use some of the stuff, or how they use some of the terms. So at a very basic level, you have a chip, and then you have something that's going to interact with that chip, or an application. So at the controller level, those are going to be all the things that are on the chip, and on the host are going to be all your applications. So whether you're doing file transfer, audio, video, all of those different types of things. The host, or the applications, are going to interface with the controller using what's called the host controller interface, or the HCI. So to take it up one notch, at the host, what you've got is all Bluetooth devices have what's called a GAP for BR EDR, or a GAT for LE, and what that basically is, very simply, it's a profile. So what is this device capable of doing? Is it capable of doing audio, video, file transfer, printing, all of those different types of things? That's defined in the profile. You have what's called the service discovery protocol, which is, hey, I'm a slave, I'm connecting to a master, and between those two, they want to figure out, hey, what can you do? What are you capable of? And then you have a protocol called the Logical Link Control and Access Protocol, or L2CAP, and that's basically your application level protocol. That's handling all of the scheduling in the application to feed that down to the controller or the chip. And I'm going to show you some of this stuff live, so hopefully it makes a little bit more sense. On the chip itself, of course, you have your link manager. That's basically controlling the physical links between the devices. You've got resource managers, the link controller, and of course, the base Bluetooth radio itself. Okay, packet format. So for Bluetooth, so for BR EDR packets, all the packets are going to start out with an access code. You have a header and a payload. So an access code, think of the access code as the pass for the slaves to talk to the master. It's like, okay, after I associate, I have an access code, and if I'm sending a packet, if I see an access code that's for me, then I know I need to listen to that. If the access code's not for me, I'm going to go ahead and discard that. I'm not going to listen to it. For the EDR, it's a little bit different. You've got an access code, a header, a guard, and a sync. And obviously, the reason why you have that guard, interval, and sync is because you're changing modulation schemes. So you're changing from GFSK to your DPSK. And then after you've got that guard interval, it's about 5 microseconds. You sync up, and then you send your data at either your 2 or your 3 meg rate based off of whatever the application is supporting. A little bit deeper, you've got in the channel access code, this, and we're going to talk about this in a second, The channel access code, channels in Bluetooth are different from what we're used to in Wi-Fi. So channels actually, basically, I almost have to think of them as their services. And depending on what you're doing, depends on how the packet's structured, for example. So in this case, you have a channel access code, but if I'm going to be discoverable, I'm going to use what's called an inquiry access code. So I'm going to use an inquiry access code, and I'm going to go and discover devices. If I'm creating a connection, I'm going to use what's called the DAC, or the device access code, because now I know that this specific device wants to connect to me. And then finally, you have something called a channel access code, which is used now when you're synchronized with the master and you're sending data back and forth. There's other things in the payload header, things like the logical transport address. So for Wi-Fi, we're used to from DS and to DS, right, to understand the directionality of how data is being flowing between the two hosts. In Bluetooth, depending on which address is being identified in the LT address or the link transport address, you can understand which direction the data is going. Additionally, you have things in there for the type of packet, flow control, sequencing, acknowledgements, and header correction. If Bluetooth is supporting encryption, you'll have a mic at the end of that payload to ensure that the mic checks out. And when you do enable Bluetooth encryption, the specification calls for AES-CCM. OK, the data transport architecture. So in working through this one took a little bit to get used to, again, because of how we work in Wi-Fi. So when we think of a physical channel in Wi-Fi, we think of a frequency space. I'm going to channel 6, and my center frequency is 2437, and I know it's 22 megahertz wide, and what have you. With Bluetooth, though, a physical channel is set up depending upon what its purpose is. So what do I mean by that? Minimally, when two devices connect to each other, there's going to be 4 channels. So one channel is going to be for your basic frequency hopping. A second channel is going to be for adaptive frequency hopping, if the device supports that. A third channel is going to be your inquiry channel. And what inquiry is going out and checking for discoverable devices. And a fourth channel for what's called paging, which is how devices actually set up their connections. So it was a little bit of a struggle trying to get the concept around. When I see physical channel, I'm thinking of like channel 6 or channel 1 or channel 11. With this, though, because it's frequency hopping, it's not a specific frequency space. It's a function, or almost like a service, that the Bluetooth is providing. So once I understood that, then it kind of all made sense. So I've got a physical channel which has its own hopping and frequency pattern to it. Then I have the physical link. The physical link is the actual point-to-point connection between a master and a slave. So that's how everything is set up. Physical links can be in a couple different states. So you can be an active physical link, where I'm actually connected to a slave and a master are connected, and I'm transmitting data back and forth. Or I can be in what's called a park state, where I'm still connected and synchronized to the master, but I'm not actually passing any data. So that's kind of cool because, if you want to go into a power save and you don't want to use any, you want to save some battery life, but you also want to stay synchronized with the master, so you don't have to go through that connection process every time you want to start to transmit data. So that's the purpose for that. The logical transports are where the packets are actually sent. So here, depending on the application, you could have asynchronous connections, you could have synchronous connections, or you could have broadcast data that goes out. Remember, a master can connect to up to 7 slaves. So it can transmit broadcast packets out to all of the slaves in the Piconet if necessary. Then you have the logical links, which is, again, it's doing all your scheduling, flow control, sequence numbering, all of that. And the logical layer, so logical links, logical transports, physical links, and physical channel are all at the controller portion of the Bluetooth architecture. Then up in the host, you've got your L2 cap channels, and the L2 cap channels is where your application data is. So again, of course, there's resourcing there. It's also setting up the types of channels and logical transports based off of its data. So for example, if I'm setting up to do printing, I have one function, whereas if I'm setting up to do dial-up networking or file transfer, I have a different type of function. So the data transport architecture, the best way I can describe it, it seems like it's very modular, depending upon what the function is and what you're trying to, what services it's providing, you're going to get a different configuration and a different kind of pathway of how your data goes. Okay? Now, above that is your Bluetooth profiles. And this is, I think everyone's familiar with this, maybe not directly, but indirectly. So if you have a Bluetooth device and it's an audio headset, basically there's a definition of what's called an audio profile or a headset profile. If the Bluetooth device can do networking, it'll have a dial-up networking Bluetooth profile. So all of that is defined in the specification. And again, that really promotes interoperability between all of these different types of Bluetooth devices. At a very basic level, all Bluetooth devices have, if you remember my course architecture slide, it's a GAP, which is General Access Profile. And that's what this is. So everyone has to say, all right, how am I going to use the radio? How am I going to use the resources as part of the radio, create links, and pass application data? Okay? And I'm going to show you, this will make more sense in a second when we get to the command line. So the states. Bluetooth devices basically have three main states. Standby, I'm just hanging out, I'm not doing anything, I'm not connected to anyone. Connected, obviously I am connected, and park. So when I'm in a standby state, I have the ability to kind of perform the functions that are out there. So again, inquiry is going out and looking for discoverable devices. So again, inquiry in Bluetooth equals discover. Paging in Bluetooth equals create a connection. And then I'm connected. When I'm connected, what that means is I have synced, the master and slave have synced, they have agreed upon a frequency hopping pattern. The time slots of when they're going to transmit their data have been set up, and the final part is the access code. The access code is set up between the master and the slave devices. So that's what connected means. And again, finally, just to review parked, what parked is I'm still connected and synchronized in the Piconet, but I'm not actually passing any data. Okay? Association models. So this looks like a very complicated slide. I'm going to try to make it very, very easy for you. So Bluetooth devices have the ability to connect and then it goes through a pairing model. So very basically, it's this. Bluetooth device is going to say, I want to connect to you. So the device that's connecting sending inquiry requests to a device that's discoverable. Device that's discoverable is going to reply with an inquiry response, and then they're going to start to say, okay, now that we've discovered each other, now let's go ahead and connect to each other. Then they switch to the paging channel. Then there is a paging request, and then a directed paging response based off of that device access code back from the master. Once that's all worked out, then they get into a connected state. When they get into a connected state, then what happens is the service discovery protocol kicks in and says, hey, what can you do? What are you capable of? Oh, okay, I see you're capable of audio, video, headset, remote control, all that fun stuff. Okay, that's awesome, but before you can connect to me, we need to go through some type of pairing process because I want to authenticate you and ensure that, I want to talk to you, basically. All right, so the Bluetooth specification actually calls out 4 different mechanisms for pairing. One is called numeric comparison. So what happens during numeric comparison is device sends an inquiry request. It goes through inquiry paging, and then a dialog is going to pop up on the interface with a 6-digit code, and it's going to ask you basically to compare. Are the two codes on those two different devices the same? That requires a user to say yes on both of the devices, and once they say yes, then they're paired, and they say, hey, you guys can talk to each other. So that's called numeric comparison. The second one is what most people are familiar with, which is called the PIN, or the personal ID number, to go ahead and enter that in. So you make a request to connect to someone that asks you for a 4-digit PIN, you enter the 4-digit PIN, and of course, if that is correct, you have the ability to go ahead and communicate with that device. Next, the third one is what's called just works. And yes, in the specification, it says just works. But there's actually some real use cases for that, right? So just works pairing mechanism pretty much is implemented when you have situations where there's no user interface. You know, to say, hey, can you compare these keys? Well, there's nothing to display it on. And there's also scenarios where there's no way you can actually type in a PIN code. So like a lot of your Bluetooth headsets, use the just works to connect to themselves. The last one, and which is kind of interesting and cool, is what's called out-of-band pairing. And out-of-band pairing basically authenticates a device through some type of physical connection. So, for example, in our medical device, we'll actually do our out-of-band pairing as simple as this. You take this guy, connect it up. You probably didn't hear it, but there's a little beep. And then now this device is paired with this device, and it says it's authorized to communicate with it. So what's really cool about that is the fact that there's nothing over the air. So there's nothing, no keys exchanged, no anything, so nothing can be sniffed or what have you. And I will never say never, but it's cool when we work it like that. Any questions on the pairing? Yes? Hmm? So synchronization between the devices is required at least every 200 milliseconds for synchronization. As far as how long it's going to stay connected in a park state, that's usually set up by the application to determine when that's going to time it out. Great question. So the question was, when it's in a park state, how long will it stay there, and does it require any type of beaconing? All right. So synchronization. I wanted to take a slide on this one because it's so important in the Bluetooth model. So synchronization occurs between the master's Bluetooth clock and what's known as the lower address portion and the upper address portion of the Bluetooth MAC address. Okay? So again, it's synchronization between the master Bluetooth clock plus what's known as the LAP and the UAP of the Bluetooth address. Now, the Bluetooth clock itself, it has nothing to do with time of day. It's basically a 28-bit counter that pretty much wraps just about under a day. So what's cool about that is, you're not worrying about, time of day synchronization or time zone issues or those types of things between master and slave communications. It's just basically a counter that goes, and when a slave device goes to connect to a master device, they're going to synchronize on that clock counter. A little bit more on that a little bit later. Now, once we are connected and we've established a frequency hop pattern, how do the master and the slave actually transmit packets? Well, they do that using this scheme called time division duplex. And this is another mitigation, again, for coexistence. And what happens is all masters are going to transmit packets on even time slots. While they're transmitting, the slaves are waiting, or they're listening. When a slave needs to transmit, they're going to transmit on odd time slots. So again, it's another great coexistence implementation and mitigation. So obviously, that's the basics of it. As you can see in the graphic, Bluetooth packets can actually be 1, 3, or 1, 3, or 5 time slots. Okay. So what that means is if I'm a slave and I have a 3 time slot packet, I'm going to start to transmit that on the next odd time slot that I have available, but I'm not going to not go through the next even. I'm going to go, and then basically the master is going to have to wait until the next available even time slot to be able to transmit back and forth. So that's how that works. So again, masters transmit on even time slots and slaves transmit on odd time slots. General hop selection. So for the frequency hop patterns, again, Bluetooth clock, lower address portion, upper address portion of the MAC address, and they sync everything up. They create a hopping pattern across, if it's BR EDR, it's going to create a hopping pattern across all 79 channels, and go ahead and do that. Now what's really cool, again, another coexistence implementation is called adaptive frequency hopping. And what adaptive frequency hopping does is it basically has mechanisms within the specification for slaves and masters to kind of report to each other. Are they running into situations where there's interference or there's other things happening in the time-slotted frequencies that they're using? If there is, what they do is they have this reporting function where they can report that says a channel is either a used channel or a channel is an unused channel. And if it's a used channel, it's very straightforward. I have to transmit a packet on the next time slot. Time slot's in the used category, just going to send it. If it's in an unused, what it's going to do is say, all right, I have to transmit a packet. Oh, that packet is in the unused. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a channel mapping table and see what map is that unused channel to the used channel and send it on that channel. Does that make sense? Or did I confuse you? So adaptive frequency hopping is a very cool mitigation. And the other thing that's really cool with adaptive frequency hopping is the minimum number of channels is 20. So can you guys remember what megahertz wide channels are in BR EDR? So in BR EDR, so classic Bluetooth is 1 megahertz. So what that means is the minimum number of channels is 20. That means I only need 20 megahertz of frequency space. Okay? So again, this is a coexistence mitigation. And I have a spectrum capture a little bit later. Hopefully that's going to identify that. All right. So interacting with Bluetooth devices. So basically, you've got some core command line things that are available that get you access to the controller level as well as the application or the host level. So you have HCI config, which allows you to configure Bluetooth devices. You've got HCI tool, which allows you to configure connections. And you've got SDB tool, which allows you to look at services that the device is capable of. OK, so there may or may not be a Bluetooth scan that may happen right now. So if you do not wish to be discovered, please turn your Bluetooth device off. All right. I'm just going to use the stuff that's in BlueZ. So just HCI, just the HCI stuff in SDP. No Ubertooth. No, I'm not going to use it. I have it, but I'm not using it. OK, so HCI config. HCI config is similar to like an IF config. This is going to show you the MAC address. It's going to show you the state of the adapter. Is the adapter up? Is it down? Can you guys see? Can you guys see the command line OK? Is it too small? It's OK? OK. So HCI tool itself has a lot of different things that are available to it. So you can get information on a device. You can send inquiries. You can send scans. It also down here has all your LE commands. So you can go ahead and do LE scans or LE info or what have you. So let's go ahead and do a scan. Let's see if there's any devices, any Bluetooth devices out there. So HCI tool, this is going and getting information related to the controllers. All right, so we got a couple that came back. We have one here called la-di-da-di-da. So let's see, what's this guy about? So you can run HCI tool info on that MAC address, and then it'll go out and get some information related to that. So you can see I've got my device name, la-di-da-di-da, and what features can it support? So can it support encryption? Can it support feedback on RSSI? What types of packets can it support? The types of slots, those types of things. So again, this is all information about the controller. Okay, so again, that was HCI tool scan. So let's see what kind of applications or profiles that this guy can connect to. So to use that, we use a command line tool called SDP tool. So what SDP tool is, if you remember, at the application level, is the service discovery protocol. So now I run SDP tool on this device. By the way, this device is mine. I'm not going after anyone. So you can see here all of the different services that it has. So you've got a service here of object exchange. So remember I was talking about profiles. This is the implementation of it. So now you can see which profiles does this device support. So this supports file transfer. It looks like it supports networking, remote control. So all of these different things are supported on this type of device. So down at the bottom, we see that we've got object push, and we've got an RF comm channel on channel 12. So let's see if we can connect to this guy. It's the tablets we got. The joys of live demos. Or did it come up? One more try. There we go. All right. So I try to make a connection to this Bluetooth device, and up pops a 6-digit number. This is an example of numeric comparison. So my team member over here, Bob, has it, and you can see on the screen, he also has a pop-up on the tablet. And does that number read 364425? So if these devices wanted to talk to each other, we would basically accept that pairing, and that is an example of numeric comparison pairing. Once we paired, we'd have the ability to communicate over all of those different services that are available. So the dial-up networking, the audio headset, all of that fun stuff. Okay, so can you see now a little bit of how what happens at the controller or the physical layer, and then what happens at the application or the service discovery, the profiles. Hopefully, going to the command line made it a little bit easier. All right, switch back. All right, so the fun stuff. As wireless professionals, when we're troubleshooting, a lot of times we have to do packet captures, right? Or frame captures. Well, one of the biggest things with being able to do frame captures is the fact that you're able to say, I'm going to do a frame capture on this channel. This channel has a center frequency, I can set my adapter to it, and I'm ready to go. Is the same happen with Bluetooth? It's not even close, right? So when you're trying to synchronize, remember the 3 things you need to synchronize minimally? You need the master's Bluetooth clock, you need the lower address portion of the MAC address, and the upper address portion. So in order to do any type of Bluetooth packet sniffing, you need to be able to get to those pieces of information to pick up the hopping pattern and then be able to actually sniff the packets. Additionally, you also need a tool that has the ability to decode the different modulations that Bluetooth has, right? Because we talked about the 3 different types of modulations that Bluetooth can do, depending on if it's basic rate or LE is doing GFSK, and then the enhanced data rate is doing the 2 variations of DPSK. If you're really interested in checking out doing Bluetooth sniffing, I highly recommend checking out these guys, Project Ubertooth, started by Mike Osman, Dominic Spill, who was a student in the UK. Basically, he wanted to make a very low-cost Bluetooth sniffing device as part of his thesis. And Mike Ryan has done some incredible work with BTLE types of things. If you want to see a really cool presentation, he does some cool things like hacking Bluetooth BTLE skateboards and stuff like that. So check these guys out. All right, so enough theory, right? Too much. So let's talk about an implementation. So with our device here, our device is a medical device. We have the ability to monitor oxygenation, pulse rate, as well as various other types of parameters that goes into hospital environments. And one of the things we kept getting asked was the fact that many patients, have situations where they got to get up out of bed, especially orthopedic patients that might have just had a hip replacement or a knee replacement. They've got to get up, do physical therapy, do their walks, and what have you. And they get tangled up in the cables. So what can we do to try to remove some of the cables? So what we did is we came up with this device. And this device here is what the patient would actually wear. So this device goes onto the patient's arm. The sensor goes onto the patient's finger. And then the Bluetooth communication is basically from the patient in bed to this host monitor here, which is typically mounted on a wall, or it could be on a roll stand, depending on how the hospital decided to implement it. So some of the things we did, fortunately understanding Wi-Fi, when we implemented our device, we're using a class 3, so we're only outputting 1 milliwatt to try to reduce as much noise as possible. We did implement adaptive frequency hopping. And the other major thing was the out-of-band pairing. So a lot of folks, especially in hospital environments, are concerned with the traffic getting hacked and that type of stuff. So the out-of-band pairing is a mitigation against that. Okay, so that's from how we implemented into our device. So of course now we want to get this in hospitals. We want to be able to work with customers and help the clinicians out in managing their patients. So as part of this, of course, our first journey can't be an easy one. It's always got to be a hard one. So the first opportunity came across was a very highly dense voice deployment. Thousands of voice communication devices that were already established in this facility and on the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. So what happened was, of course, is we're coming in with a Bluetooth device, and the first response is, no way. You're not taking that thing in here, you're going to break the voice, and we're going to have all kinds of issues, and it's not going to happen. So fortunately, what we were able to do is we were able to work with the manufacturer as well as the customer to come up with a test plan to decide, is there really any types of interference or what have you at the facility. So before we did that, we wanted to get a controlled environment. We really wanted to understand how this guy was going to work. So what we decided to do, we brought some team members out that were going to ultimately go to this customer, and we decided that we were going to collect spectrum analysis and packet captures at the client and the AP. So what we did is we set up a client in an office, closed walls, shut the door, and had another Wi-Fi client connect to an access point on the 2.4 gigahertz. And then what we started to do is turn on a bunch of these devices, like literally right around the laptop. And I have an example of that here in a second. So we captured a 2-minute baseline period, and then after that 2-minute baseline period, we started adding devices and let them run for 5 minutes. So as a result of that, this is the spectrum analysis with 5 devices around this Wi-Fi client. So basically, literally this really close area of 5 devices only really created approximately about a 5% increase in channel utilization. In this particular case, it was around channels 3 and 4. So we said, okay, what does it look like at the AP? So this access point was approximately about 20, 25 feet away from where the Wi-Fi client was. So kind of a typical, in a hospital, you're going to see that the client's that far away. And we looked at the spectrum analysis there, and there was really no change. No change at all. So part of what we attributed that to, really, is the fact that we implemented it as a Class 3 device. Right? So we're not blasting out the air and kind of killing stuff. We're focused on the area within the patient's room for that communication. So we said, okay, that was 5 devices. Let's push it a little bit more. Oh, I'm sorry. Client performance. So it's from the packet analysis, what we did is we took the statistics for the baseline period, and then we took the statistics for after we ran all 5 devices. And basically, we saw actually a little bit of an increase in performance from the retry perspective. And what we think that was related to was the adaptive frequency hopping shifting away from the actual Wi-Fi channel. And you might see that here in a second. So we decided to push the limit a little bit more. So we grabbed a conference room. And there's my laptop set up. That's another, to your left of that, there's another medical device there that communicates Wi-Fi. There was an access point in that conference room. So we repeated the same test, except this time we had 10 of them. So 10, for sure, we definitely saw an increase in the channel utilization, but not really a lot. So we had 10 devices in this concentrated area around the spectrum analyzer, and we see it go from relatively no channel utilization to 5% to up to about 15% channel utilization with a highly concentrated set of devices. As part of that spectrum capture, what was cool is we kind of got to see a little bit here of how the adaptive frequency hopping was working. So you can see at the start of this capture, there's not too much activity going on in the frequency spaces around channel 9, 10 area, right? It's kind of, you can see how there's more white space there. But as you start to see, we add more devices. Again, we added a device every 5 minutes. As we started to add devices, you can see actually that frequency space there, that lane for channel that in the 9 space there starts to fill in, and you can see that classic kind of Bluetooth, the teeth, the lanes that you see on channel 6. You actually see that kind of start to shift over to that frequency space in the channel 9. So you can actually see the adaptive frequency hopping algorithm kind of moving around the channel. Metageek. Yep.
Any issues with frequency hopping and missing to
Not specifically. I mean, basically what we did is we ran it for the 5 minutes for the reasons of the scanning so that we would have enough time to ensure we weren't missing anything over that time period. But yeah, this is direct out of one of their standard reports, their report builder. Super easy to use. Okay, so that was a controlled environment. So in this controlled environment, we really didn't see there was too much impact. We obviously saw an increase in the noise floor when we had 10 devices around, but that's never going to happen, realistically in a hospital. There's not even physically that much space in a hospital, but 10 devices in a room. So we felt pretty good going into that. So what we had to do was basically come up with a test plan. How are we going to test this? Because now we're talking about impacting an application as high requirements of voice. And obviously, this was already an entrenched technology in this facility. They weren't going to make any changes. And there was thousands of these devices, so nothing was going to change. So what we decided to do is, again, in working together with the customer and the manufacturer, we came up with a proposal to map out a walking track, right? Because it's voice. We wanted to ensure that we were capturing the roaming of the devices, ensure we weren't negatively impacting them. So we mapped out a walking track. We did a quick baseline site survey as well as spectrum analysis to understand exactly what we were going into. Of course, we did packet captures as well. I cannot stress enough how important it is to do a baseline when you're doing any types of these testing. Obviously, what we're doing is a before and after type of test here. So we decided we're going to set up a walking path. We're going to have multiple passes. We're going to do multiple passes doing unicast communications, and then we'll have multiple passes doing multicast communications. There was two communication devices which would be used for roaming, and then one communication device which would be stationary and not moving around. So, and of course, collecting spectrum and packet captures all along the way at each one of those points. This was the start. So, entrenched voice application, and we were already walking in, and the spectrum was at 65 to 70% utilization. So, needless to say, it was challenging right out of the gate. Remember I said how important it is to baseline? It's not only important to baseline as you're starting your test, but before each one of your tests. We were in a situation where we went up to start to do another set of tests of collection, and we turned our analyzers on, and we were getting this. So the frequency, or the channel utilization had jumped up to 90%. So needless to say, there wasn't going to be too much working in that situation. And as part of doing the testing and walking around and standing there, this big piece of equipment left, got on the elevator, went down the elevator, and all of a sudden we saw the frequency channel utilization start to go down. So ultimately what we learned, it was a portable X-ray machine that had an access point on it in workgroup bridge mode transmitting at 100 milliwatts. So needless to say, there wasn't too much communication going on that unit, or probably the unit above and below that for this period. Okay, so the packet captures for the baseline. This is baseline. We haven't turned anything on yet, and we're getting in the neighborhood of 45% retries. What you have here, R1 and R2 are the roaming badges. The S column is the static communication device. Okay, so you can see we have high channel utilization, and we have high retry rates already. So given this environment, this is a live environment. It's dynamic. You have equipment going in and out. You've got people going in and out, patients in and out, family members. You've got all kinds of things going on there. When we went to actually analyze the packets with the instruments on, we got all kinds of different things, quite honestly. So we had situations where things got a little bit worse. So things got 4%, the good data got 4% worse, and in other passes it got better. And basically what we had to do, just as Devin had mentioned yesterday, is the user experience is king. So as part of the voice communications, we had a streaming file that was playing. And the manufacturer was actually the one who was assessing the quality of the voice streams. So during our baseline, we already had identified there was situations where there was choppy audio to start with, but there was also periods where everything worked fine. When we turned the devices on, nothing really changed. We didn't really see any significant impacts directly.
Choppy audio with 45% retries?
Just a little bit. just a little bit. Just a little bit of choppiness. So at the end of the day, basically, there was no real impact of this, how we implemented the Bluetooth in this environment. There was really no impact on these devices. In comparison to the baseline data, the user experience had to win. And the major thing that we actually identified for these folks is what optimizations they could make on their WLAN. So on their wireless LAN, one of the big things was they had all of the lower data rates enabled. So right away, the manufacturer recommended that they turn those off. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that while we were testing. It needed to go to a review committee or what have you to be able to turn them off. But long story short is at the end of the day, there was really not too much impact related to implementing the Bluetooth device in this, the way we implemented it in this environment. So the conclusions: optimize the technology implementation. Think about the use case, of course, that you're using it in. You don't need to be blasting out 100 milliwatts if you only care about what's going on in a specific area. Set it to 1 milliwatt or 2.5, depending on what your use case is. Nothing can replace on-site testing. Nothing, because that's the real world. There's no theory anymore. It's what is actually going on. What are the packets telling us? What's the utilization telling us? What are our users telling us, which is the most important thing. Remember to always baseline, because you never know in a dynamic environment what you're up against, and obviously those things that change are going to have a big impact on you. Create a test plan, ensure that everyone is aligned, not only what you're going to do, but how you're going to analyze it and who is going to analyze it, right? Because of course, customers are always waiting for those results, and if you can't figure out who's collecting the data and who's analyzing it, it's going to be a delay, and it's going to take a lot of time. And then finally, use the real-world data and user experience to drive those conclusions as far as, is the application performing or is it not? So with that, I'll take any questions.
So were you brought in retroactively because they were complaining about audio issues and they wanted to prove out these devices are not causing an issue or was this totally proactive?
So Sam asked, were we brought in after we implemented our devices, just because, to see if there was a result on the voice application, or was it proactive? It was 100% proactive. What happened was the customer basically, or the manufacturer heard it was a Bluetooth device and they said, no, you can't bring that in. And as a result of them saying, no, you can't bring that in, then it stimulated some conversations as far as how we believed it would work, and basically give us an opportunity to show you in the real world. Yes?
Do you know if channel utilization changes with the functionality of what you're using the Bluetooth device for?
Well, obviously if you're sending data that's continuous stream, or it's obviously the channel utilization is going to be more constant. To be honest, I really haven't seen it really have too much of an impact based on the frequency hopping and then the time division duplex of how it kind of jumps around to the different spacings. But obviously, if you're using something that's streaming audio, video, obviously channel utilization will be a little bit more versus like a low-powered BLE tag. It's going to be a moment in time, and it's not going to be that big of a deal. Yes? Yeah, so we're definitely running into barcode scanners. Oh, I'm sorry. So the question was, we talked about our device, but what about barcode scanners and their impact on other devices, correct? So yeah, we've definitely seen barcode readers out there. A lot of them now, they're not really going at blasting at 100 milliwatts anymore. They're more in the 2.5 milliwatts. So the newer ones are a little bit better. For us, it's if we're there. So if we're there and we're analyzing and they're actually utilizing them, then obviously we could measure it. But if we're not there, then we're obviously not measuring it. So the question is diagnostic tools, what if your Bluetooth device isn't working? What do you do to troubleshoot it? So first and foremost, from the patient data collection, there's plenty of mitigations for that. We actually have storage on the device, and the patient will continue to be monitored. If it's not working, then we use our traditional tools. We use Spectrum Analyzer. We'll go in, see what's going on, and then obviously we have internal tools to understand, are we connecting to it or not connecting to it. So the question is, are there any third-party tools? Obviously, Spectrum Analyzers. We definitely covered that a lot during the sessions. For packet captures, like I said, there's not really a solid packet capture tool out there. Obviously, Ubertooth is definitely the most affordable and closest to be able to do that. But it's not going to decode enhanced data rates, unfortunately. So right now, for packet captures with Bluetooth, there isn't really a portable, easy-to-use tool for Bluetooth captures. Scott? Great question. So Scott's question was, as the iterations of Bluetooth improved, are there any recommendations as far as what they should be purchasing? I believe adaptive frequency hopping was incorporated in version 2.0 of BR-EDR, the classic Bluetooth. I believe that adaptive frequency hopping has been in the low energy, I think, since the beginning of Bluetooth 4. I think the biggest recommendation I can have is the power. What power class is it, and if it is a higher power class or a lower power class, so a 1 is 100 milliwatts. If it's a lower power class, then do you have the ability to adjust that or not to meet the use case demands? Other questions?
Okay,
all right,
we're good.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.